Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
But it is interesting when you talk about the moving target. I love that whole thing, and like when we were talking earlier, about just how do you make things make sense to the client, because obviously, Tyler can talk about this stuff in crazy detail. I mean, with all the wealth of knowledge that he's earned over the years, and it's like, how do you then streamline that to what the client needs to know? Here's how I can directly influence your next, you don't want to throw too much at them, so it's like, okay, go home lesson number 1, this, and then so on and so on. That's always been, or at least right now, like in my career, that's where I have the most fun try to figure things out. Like right now I have a foster dog. I work with a couple rescues here in the Phoenix area, and one of them is feral, like feral. And he's feral dog number 3, because we have lots of feral dogs coming from like nearby, Native American reservations or just on the streets and things like that. And so he had to be like trapped in like an animal trap, and and it was this whole thing to get him going. And we have had him now for like a month, and you would never know. He's actually, we just did a couple walks, these past couple days with his new dad, and it is interesting. I mean, and I bring him up to say that the whole moving target, and kind of Brent was talking about like just evolving with the dog through the training process. And for him, it was this whole like domestication process before the training process, and just building any kind of trust with people whatsoever, before I could even like treat him like a board and train.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And one thing I've had a lot of fun talking to the dad about is, as the dog moves through their phases of training, you kind of learn when to like ease up, like on the gas pedal, so to speak. So one thing that I get asked a lot, like there is the whole Caesar question, but the other dog trainer question is like, oh my God, you're a dog trainer. You must be so patient, and I tell people all the time, like, yeah, but it's also important to know when to not be that patient, and when to like, it's okay to kind of set boundaries for dogs and really help them understand certain things that they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And also,
or when to push them past the plateau.
Exactly.
It's time to like, like I need to put a little bit of pressure on this dog. I need to, because it's in their own best interest, just like a kid, just like a child,
Real quick, I wanted to take a quick pause and just let everybody know who's listening that Tyler has actually given us an exclusive promo code for ConsiderTheDog.com. So if you guys are interested in starting a new membership, you guys can go to ConsiderTheDog.com and type in promo code DTP 2020. It's DTP, like Dog Trainers Podcast, DTP 2020, and you guys can save over 65% off your first month's membership. Okay, cool. Just wanted to let you guys know we're going back to the podcast now.
Well, and that's
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that's what brought my head to this dog, because before I got hands on him, the rescue themselves, they had him for like 5-6 weeks, something like that, and he just couldn't. He was like he's like a really sweet, really good with other dogs, and he'll come right up to you, tail wagging. But the second you reach out to touch him, he's gone. The second they tried to leash him, that leash was bitten through like in a second, and no crate, no nothing, and so they couldn't get him like vaccinated and stuff so that I could get him to my place, where we've got client dogs and things. So it took them a long time, and they were like, Mariano, like, why is he not opening up to us? Like, why is he just as bad as he was like 5 weeks ago? I don't get it, and they were consulting with our big network of like, they just, in the rescue business, people, vets and other rescuers and other trainers and things. And I told them,
confusing themselves.
Yeah. But I told them exactly that. I was like, essentially, he's gotten to about where he's going to get right now without you kind of pushing him in that direction. So let's get him, like on a leash. Let's get him to the vet. We had to kind of wrangle him into a crate, get him over there, and then they had to like, put him to sleep for a bit so they can get everything done to him, like fix him and microchip him. We got him to the house, and then once I got a leash on him, we just start pushing. And of course, he was nervous, so I had to kind of play with the like fundamentals of training a little bit. This dog was not excited about taking treats from me, so I started with like really low level leash work, just to get him comfortable, and not like, you pull, and I'm talking like a hair's breadth, hardly touch that leash, and he immediately jolts the other way. Yeah, exactly. Bronco. Right. Yep. So once we got him going through that, and he was understanding, like, look, I at least can go through this, and I'm okay. I need to learn how to just chill. Then food work became an option. Then we moved on to e-collar stuff and desensitizing and bringing him out and teaching the new dad about proper like socialization and how that's a moving target. But that's a lot of fun. Knowing when to pressure a dog can really open up their world.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think we had an
absolutely.
episode talking about our, how to phase through training, and it was mostly for like young dog trainers who don't know when to, get on the gas pedal, get off the gas pedal. And, we were just kind of given some instruction of when to know, right? If I were to ask you that question, Tyler, like when would you know, like what are some telltale signs that you could say, okay, we are ready to start, whatever the gas pedal means. It could mean applying pressure. It could mean, now we can give the dog more freedom. Now we can have to take some freedom away, like whatever it might be. What are some signs in your work that are very obvious to you to know when to move on to a next phase of training?
Yeah, that's a tough. I don't know if I can answer that question.
Yeah, I guess it's very broad.
There's definitely. I mean, so like there's times where it's simple as far as like when to move on, right? Like,
Right.
like if I'm teaching something new, like I'm teaching obedience, there are definitely like standards of, okay, when my criteria has been met, I know to like push things a little bit.
Yeah.
But as far as like if I'm working with a behavior issue and sort of, like you guys said, when to put your foot on the gas and when to take it off.
Mm-hmm.
I think really for me, what it comes down to is again, like really just listening to the dog, like listening to what the dog is telling you.
Right.
We've got a dog in right now that's with a rescue. He's a deaf pitty, and he's bitten. I think he's bitten like 7 people now. Like really, he's up there. But he's really very sweet, and you could tell he's just nervous. And he's been with us for, I don't know, 3-4 days or something right now.
Right.
And all we're doing right now is just, I feel like he's gotten to where he is because, again, he's deaf, so he can't hear you anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the average person, by no fault of their own, it's just not common knowledge, doesn't really know how to really use their body in a very intentional and clear way with a dog.
Right.
To show the dog not only what they want, but also to show the dog that they understand what the dog wants.
Right.
And I think that latter portion is really important. And you'll see a little bit of that in that video that I was just talking about, the connecting with a fear aggressive dog. You'll see a little bit of that where I very purposely will do something where I'll, like, for instance, turn into the dog with a little bit of spatial pressure so that the dog can say, like, oh, hey, that makes me uncomfortable. And that I can go, oh, that makes you uncomfortable.
Oh, so sorry.
I'll back off. And the dog goes, holy shit, you listen to me?
Yeah.
Right?
To give him some control back in the situation.
But I have to put the dog in the situation where it wants to say, hey, please stop, so that I can go, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like, I'll stop. Right?
Yeah. That develops better trust for
and
sure.
So that early stage is less about me showing the dog what I want and more about me showing the dog that I understand them and that I'll listen to them.
And I speak your language. Yeah.
And once I learn how to listen to the dog, the better I am at listening to the dog, the better I know when the dog can be pushed and when they can't.
That's great.
Appropriate when it's not. I think it's less about when to push and like way more about like when not to.
Yeah. That's a good framing.
You can push until the dog says, like, hey, like, I'm stressing a little bit.
Right.
But I also think that we have a tendency as humans, and we all have this tendency, and this is whether we're working on obedience or behavior, to feel like if we don't see the problem, we're not fixing the problem.
Right.
And so, like, every repetition, we tend to push the dog right to the point where the problem is tangible. The problem is visible. And one thing that I stress so much with my clients and with other trainers that I coach is that the successful repetitions are the ones that really matter.
Yes.
Right. So, okay, let's say the dog's reactive, and I know that if I get the dog to, 30 feet away from another dog, it starts to, tense up or whatever. I can see the dog stressing. And I go, okay, and I work a little bit, and then all of a sudden I go up to 30 feet and the dog doesn't stress. Our tendency is like, okay, well, now we got to go a little bit further.
Right.
Why don't you just sit there and do like 10 or 20 reps at that point that the dog used to stress at, but now they don't.
Right.
And let the dog just have that new experience and realize that that's setting in a new memory. That's setting in for the dog that, hey, there is this other way of existing. Exactly. And that's true even when you're just doing, like, I was working with a client today whose dog is really pushy on the walk, and it can be also very dog reactive. So we were working on teaching the dog to walk behind us, which is something that I love doing. And, we're kind of doing like a starting and stopping drill. So you come to a stop and, you obviously don't want the dog to go in front of you. And,
are you using leash or e-collar at the time?
Neither. Actually.
Oh, cool.
Neither. Yeah. I have my secrets.
Okay. You gotta pay for that.
Honestly,
Right on.
We use a lot of spatial pressure for
Nice,
it.
nice. Okay.
Pressure. And then one of my favorite tools for teaching dogs to walk behind me is actually just a squirt bottle with water.
Cool.
It can be, if you know how to use it right, it can be an extremely effective tool.
Right.
And really easy for the owner to use. Like no technique necessary kind of thing.
Right.
So, we do a couple reps and the dog gets a correction and then the dog does good. And I was like, okay, cool. So now, like, I want you to just keep taking one step and stop and one step and stop and just let the dog do good. Like, don't move on from this. Let the dog realize that, hey, wait a minute, when I stay behind you, like there's no little squirt of water on my nose. Oh my gosh. But if we never let the dog have those experiences, they just think, oh, okay, so this is what happens now. Every time you stop, you squirt me on the nose. Okay, great.
Yep.
Right? They never learn that, like, oh, wait a minute, there's an alternative that doesn't result in that behavior.
Right.
And maybe the dog gets one rep of not getting squirted, and then we push them to their limit again, so they make a mistake and they get squirted. It's like, no. For every one time that you correct the dog, for every one time you push the dog to their stress level, get 10 reps in where you don't.
Right.
You know?
Condition that.
Yeah. So that's kind of for me, okay, so I got all these successful reps in. Okay, so now let's push a little bit. All right, we pushed a little bit. Now let's back off. Let the dog feel the success. Okay, we push a little bit. Then we back off. Let the dog. I like the dog to win a lot.
Yes.
I like the dog to learn where their advantage is. That's something that, Bart Bellin used to talk about a lot. He says, every dog is going to do what's in their own best interest. You have to help the dog learn where their advantage lies.
Right.
And so often we don't do that. We just push them to their limits over and over and over again.
And the dog's always under stress. He's always under stress because we're always pushing.
Always. Yeah. The key to the successful use of punishment, for instance, is not the punishment itself. It's when the dog learns how to avoid it.
Yep.
Right.
And the dog goes reps in where they can consistently avoid and get confident in their ability to avoid.
Yeah. And that brings up a good like rough kind of estimate that because I like that a lot. A person that I trained with here in Arizona is Sean Thomas, and he's he's a good dog trainer, and he owns a kennel here in Gilbert, Arizona. But what was really amazing to watch was he's amazing with like Schutzen work, and his personal dogs are just on point all the time, and he runs like a club out of the like after hours out of the kennel, and the way that he breaks it down to clients is he'll draw on a little whiteboard. He'll draw like a triangle, and he'll kind of split it into like 10 little segments with a marker. And he'll say, okay, so here's people's problems when it comes to dog training. We're talking like the average owner. The bottom of the triangle is obviously the biggest, and the top is the smallest. And people's goal is, I want my dog to stop reacting to other dogs when I walk on a leash, blah, blah, blah. And he comes up with this end result, and he puts a little dot at the top of the triangle. And he says, they always seem to undermine the importance of the foundational work, which naturally in the triangle is the biggest part. They just want to, and he would draw little things like plus, 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 minus, plus, plus, however many of those fit within the bottom, segment of the triangle. Let's say it's like 10. And he would kind of make it a point to be like, look, each and every one of these repetitions, good and bad, are valuable. They're learnable moments for the dog. But there is kind of that point of like diminishing return where if your dog is failing more than they're winning, you're doing something wrong. You need to back up. And you need to slice thinner segments into the triangle and really start to figure out and dissect what is the variable that's giving you trouble right now. And so the way that I kind of play with it in my head is like the ratio I look for is like 70-ish%. If the dog's winning 70% of the time, I'll let them win, do a good job. And once they're kind of there to where they're doing it pretty much all the time, like easy, then you push them back enough to where it's about 70% again. So they're still earning. They're still floating, not sinking, so to speak. But it's a little bit of a challenge again. But I definitely agree with you that a big issue that I have in dog training these days is, regardless of training method, it's more just, it seems like people really like to market now, like I can off-leash train any dog ever in 2 weeks, period.
Oh God, yeah.
And and I'll find a lot of people call me and they're like, yeah, well, I spoke to somebody who said this, this, and this. And I'm like, that's okay, but there's something to be said for just sheer repetition. It helps. Let the dog be good at what they do, and just giving them time to just go through over and over and just really ingrain it. It's like we were talking about like anything else, like a martial art, and and that's when you get comfortable enough to play with something, but it doesn't happen in 2 weeks.
Right.
And what does happen in 2 weeks is not the same.
That's
right.
That's what I want to talk about. Actually,
it's just not the same, and the owners would not want to see what their dog's emotional state was through that process.
Right.
Just wouldn't.
No.
you know, the process matters. How the dog feels about it matters.
Right.
And, you know, yeah, I mean, we used to do 2-week board and trains, and we would do a lot of follow-up too. And I got to a point in my career where I stopped even offering them. I was just like, I just don't, I feel too pressured. I feel like it's just not the way it should be. And I just stopped doing it. But yeah, that whole, like, I guarantee off leash. Well, guess what? That's what's supposed to happen if the dog's midway through week 2 and the off leash isn't working, but that trainer just guaranteed you. So they have a financial incentive to make sure this goddamn dog comes when called, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do not want to see the level of pressure that's going to be put on that dog.
No.
Yeah, and I've seen.
I don't do guarantees because this isn't fixing a washing machine. This is a living, breathing animal with feelings. You know what I mean? Like, no way, man.